I'm Jeremy Cohen, the chair at the Critical Theory in the Arts Department. And the Critical Theory in the Arts Department and the Visual and Critical Studies departments are pleased to bring you tonight's lecture in the Serious Times lecture series, because truly we live in serious times. And we're pleased for the year's inaugural lecture to bring Frances Fox Piven here, whom I sort of can't say enough about how fond I am of Frances, and also how much her thinking has influenced me, and I think many of us in interest in politics. You know, really anyone who wants to understand the first thing about American politics and being on the American left has to go to Frances's work. It sets the bar in books like Poor People's Movements, Why Americans Don't Vote, Regulating the Poor, Challenging Authority. Time and again, Frances has exposed the mechanisms by which power holds people out of the democratic process in the United States, and also how, yet, despite that, people have challenged and overcome all the ways in which they're systematically disenfranchised in a purportedly democratic society. So I can't think of anyone better to help us understand kind of the mess we're in the larger sense, and also in the more local sense, how much things are really changing in front of us right now. Frances has been a guest of the program many times before, and I hope will be many times again as we try to see our way out of things. So please join me in giving her the warmest possible welcome.
You know, when I chose the title for tonight's talk, What Just Happened, I was thinking of the election. I mean, it's what we all want to talk about, isn't it? But I didn't quite anticipate that every day between the election and the talk, more things would happen. I didn't anticipate that the governor of Florida would commandeer the election machines, presumably to have some influence over what the election machines report. But it's been like that every day for a couple of years, hasn't it? Don't you wake up in the morning and you go to your computer? I go to my computer, maybe you go to the radio, and you're asking yourself, what just happened? Or if you go to a meeting or something, and then you ask, what just happened? So let me just say very briefly what you all know, what you're all thinking about the election itself. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. We have a big Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. That's pretty good. That means that the House of Representatives can begin to investigate the Trump family, the Trump cabinet, the Trump executive agencies and what they've been doing, the Mueller report. If the Mueller report is blocked by Trump and the Department of Justice, well, the House of Representatives can put it on display. So that's good. So we've got a foot in the national government. Very, very good, because it was getting scary. Then also we have a number of Midwestern governors that have flipped to the Democrats. That's good because state governments, that means state assemblies, state senates, state governorships, have been very important in suppressing votes in the United States, in stealing elections. And maybe we should talk a little bit at some point about the Republican strategy of dealing with the changing demography and the changing political preferences of the public by stealing elections. That's their strategy. And it is working. There's a little blip with the recent election, but it's basically working. So now we've got this foot in the national government, the House of Representatives, the capacity to investigate. But you should hold on to your seats, because it's going to be very rocky. It's going to be a wild ride. You know that, don't you? That Trump, the Mad King, you don't know what he's going to do. No one knows what he's going to do. He's so impetuous and risk prone, and he doesn't care. He cares about himself and maybe his family. So, but it's also going to be a mad ride for another reason. Partially as a result of Trump's influence, because as I'll try to explain in a moment, he is a strongman politician. That's the kind of politician he is. Partly as a result of his influence, we have in this country a very large, very agitated fascist movement. It's here. It draws on certain traditional strands in American culture, our racism, our xenophobia, our Wild West mentality, our inclinations toward violence, especially white men's inclination toward violence, although I think Trump likes to watch violence, not engage in it. But that movement is here. It's the Trump voters are the base of the movement. And the shooters come out of the movement. So we got to deal with that. We got to live with that. That's one reason it's going to be a wild ride. But the other reason is that we have to remember that the ruling class in the United States, and I mean by that the centers of economic power, the fossil fuel industry, the finance industry, they were happy with Trump. Now, it's maybe true that during the primaries, they weren't sure which way they would go, but once he won and controlled all the branches of the federal government, they were just as happy to go along with it because they were getting everything they wanted from his legislative initiatives. That they got what they wanted, that's all that they cared about. So, now, a lot of people are reflecting on what just happened, but also what happened in 2016. As I was saying to Jeremy, I'm a political scientist. Political scientists have to be able to explain things like this. Otherwise, what use are they? Actually, maybe you should say what use are they? So they've been trying to explain it because it flies in the face of most of the truisms that are produced by the study of American politics. The truisms which tend to lead us to think that what's going to happen in the future is what happened in the past. And that no leading politician will transgress the norms of the Supreme Court, for example. Who could ever imagine that leaders of the Senate of the United States would refuse to exercise their authority to advise and consent to the president's Supreme Court nomination and refuse to consider the nominee at all? Who ever imagined that? Well, not political scientists. They are the last to imagine that. Never. So political science has been sort of taken aback. And what they have reverted to, or at least what I read and listen to, is scrutinizing the voters to figure out why the voters voted for Trump. What is it about the American public that led them to elect the Orange Menace as President of the United States? Well, and there are two broad hypotheses. The first is that a lot of people were suffering from economic insecurity and maybe hardship. Particularly, that's the sort of Midwest voters who put Trump over the top in the Electoral College. And these white voters, male voters particularly, but not just men, women voted for Trump too in 2016. Might not do it again, but they did. They voted for Trump because he said, I'm a good businessman, I can fix things. The other theory, and there are many variations, as I'll explain, on these two hypotheses. The other hypothesis is that it was a kind of out-group hostility. It was a kind of racism that drove people to vote for Trump. It was because he attacked immigrants and because he was clear he didn't like blacks, clear from his own history, from nothing else. And with these two hypotheses, all sorts of studies have been done because you can sort of jiggle the argument to produce a lot of different kinds of data. If your measures of economic insecurity don't correlate with Trump voters, well, you can instead measure the level of economic insecurity in the neighborhood of the voter. Or, there are all sorts of ways in which you can try to verify one hypothesis or another. So, that's pretty much what I think students of American politics have been doing. And the other thing that they've also finally recognized is that there's a lot of cheating in American elections, and that the cheating often takes quasi-legal forms, like making it hard for certain groups in the population that are unlikely to support your party or your candidate, making it harder for them to vote, making it harder for them to register to vote, making the lines very long in their neighborhoods, shortening the periods in which they can vote. Those are just examples. And then, of course, you may also, and we don't know much about this yet, you may also fix the machines so that the machines don't register their preferences. That also can happen. It certainly has happened, something equivalent to that has happened in the history of American elections. And the other main way in which you try to cheat to determine the electoral outcome, even if your party and your candidate clearly doesn't have support, is by gerrymandering districts, by carving out the district in a way that is going to throw the election to your side. Well, so I think all that happened, and I think that there was economic insecurity probably had an effect on the electorate, especially those white men who are used to being the big shots. And I think also that there's a lot of racism in America. That's all true. But here's a big problem with all of that. Scrutiny, argument, all the papers that are being written. If you lift your eyes from our inevitable preoccupation with our own country and our own situation and our own politics, if you step back, then what you see right away is that this is happening all over the world. All over the world. Strong men spouting racist rhetoric and promising fabulous economic improvements are coming to power. Across the developed world, across Europe, in Western Europe, they're not coming to power, but there are strong Nazi fascist parties that are developing. In Eastern Europe, they are taking power. In Poland, Hungary. And it's also happening across the global South. Just look at the election recently in Brazil. Bolsonaro is a fascist. And in a certain way, Brazil is the last place we would have expected such a development, because Brazil is the country of Lula and the PT and the pink tide. Brazil was the leading country in Brazil when a kind of social democracy seemed to envelop the continent, and that was very recently. So we need an explanation that is capable of dealing with the scale of this phenomena, which of the right-wing strongman, right-wing populism it's often called, and the kind of popular movement that the strongman provokes. So I propose a very maybe self-evident explanation. I think there are 3 parts to it. The first part is that across the globe, the economic landscape has changed dramatically with the rise of neoliberal capitalism, the spread of globalization, the decimation of the old industrial plants and the old industrial towns and the industrial fabric, the fabric of the communities in which these industrial workers live, their unions, their associations. These have been decimated by economic change. So it probably is the case that a lot of people are experiencing hardship as a result of this. They're losing the steady full-time work that they once had. They're thrown into precarious employment. But just as important as the direct economic impact on their livelihood, I think, is the sense of ruination that afflicts these communities. The sense that there may not be a future where what is going to happen to my son, to my daughter, there was a time when automobile workers were said, I don't know if it's true, but everybody sort of said that auto workers were so proud of what they had achieved through the unions, and they had a good income, they took vacations, they had a little house with a white picket fence, they had an RV in the backyard. They were so proud of what they had done, of what they had become. So they were glad to see their sons and daughters enter into the automobile workers and into the automobile plants. That was success. What about if all of that is destroyed? That's no future for you, no future for your kids. That would create a lot of anxiety, frustration and anxiety. And frustration and anxiety and directed against whom? Who do you direct it against? Who do you blame? Me? Well, there's a funny pattern that I see in my study of historical social movements, especially social movements among white men, like the Knights of the White Camellia or the Ku Klux Klan. And that pattern is they always blame people beneath them. Now, it doesn't make sense intellectually because people beneath them are unlikely to have had the power to have created these circumstances. But it makes sense in another way. You can kick those people and nobody's going to punish you for it. Anyway, there is a lot of blaming people beneath them, it seems to me. So that's one thing that all these places have in common. Another, I'm calling these things, another political fact that they all have in common is, I think, the failure of the center left. In all of these countries and in the global south, Lula failed his people. Now, maybe he couldn't help it. Maybe the constraints of the investor class, of international capitalism, prevented him from initiating the policies that would have protected his constituency. Or maybe he was sucked into the clientelist transactional politics that characterized Brazil and other South American countries. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I do have an answer for the United States where something similar happened. And now what I'm saying is happened everywhere. The center left failed us. The Democratic Party failed the white working class. It allowed the landscape on which they lived and where they saw their hopes flourish and then dissipate. It allowed that landscape to change without offering the people who lived on the landscape any protection or any hope. Now, that goes way back, actually. I think the Democratic Party facilitated the economic changes that created this desert-like landscape. They did it with their highway programs, which emptied out the central cities and emptied out the manufacturing in the central cities. They did it with their water and sewer grants for suburban and southwestern development. And they finally did it with the trade pacts championed by the Clintons. Well, and that happened everywhere. That's what New Labor was, Tony Blair. So that's the second political condition that all these places have in common. The third is what we're talking about, the rise of the right. Now, the rise of the right isn't just the strong men who take center stage and are so bellicose and so flamboyant. The rise of the right means the rise also of business, of organized business. In all of these countries, business becomes much more aggressive. And it allows and maybe funds the populist strongman politics because it benefits from it. So this is extremely dangerous. Look, we won in this recent election, but even when we win, a lot of the elements of this transformation still remain. We still have a desiccated industrial landscape where we once had factories and working class communities. We still have the enraged men, white men, who voted for Trump and will stick with him no matter what. He's right about that. We have that. We still have, and this is the worst of all, we still have a fossil fuel industry that is so headstrong and desperate. It's sort of on a, fossil fuels can't prosper forever because the planet cannot take it. So fossil fuels seems to be on a path to bring us all down with them. They want to get it out of the ground while they can. And we need them to keep it in the ground. And that creates a kind of something that we haven't often seen, which is a ruling elite economic strata that is very sort of impetuous, almost suicidal. And of course, the rise of finance, which is a business based on speculation and risk. So we're left with that. That's what we have. So now I'm going to let you tell us what we're going to do. But I'll say a little bit about that. I think that, I ordinarily, wherever I go, no matter what year it is, I always call for protest movements. Movements are my thing. I believe in movement politics. But I have to say, I have been a little bit anxious about the rise of protest movements under the conditions that I've just described. Because I think that not only Trump, but the right-wing Republican Party, with Trump at its head, but it is a very right-wing party now, that party would like to create a kind of clash, the clash that would result from repression of protesters, particularly if you could claim that the protesters were violent. And that's what the authorities always claim, that the protesters are violent. And anything is violent. Loud noise, property destruction of any kind, it's all violence, and therefore justifies the mobilization of the armed forces of the state. I've worried about that. And for that reason, I placed a lot of emphasis, a lot of hope in the amazing efforts by all sorts of groups, mainly made up of young people, mainly made up of people to the left, maybe the center left, to take over the Democratic Party. That effort began as soon as Trump was elected. It was really spontaneous. People figured out that that's what they should do. And they entered a party that was often sort of unpopulated at the bottom of the ticket, where the local apparatus was pretty much a shell, if it was even a shell. And they brought vigor and energy to it. These groups are a significant part of why we won in the midterm election. And they're also, some of them are old. Obama for America is old, a little old. Move On is a little old. But a lot of them are new. Swing Left, Indivisible, the Sister District. And then all the people who decided they were going to run for office, so that we have now a very substantial contingent of Black women in the House of Representatives. That's very good. You know, Black people are in a way the sturdiest political people in the United States, and the women are better. So that was a very good thing to do. And I'm still worried about calling for disruptive protest movements. It doesn't mean that the time will not come, but I'm a little bit worried because I think Trump would use any excuse to create a Reichstag fire. Do you know what the Reichstag fire was? Well, someone, nobody will ever know who, maybe the Nazis, burned down what was essentially the Parliament building in Berlin. And that provided the excuse, the justification for the escalation of Nazi tactics in Germany. So it's a difficult time, but it's a time to be involved in politics, and there are many different ways to do it. I don't mean, when I say protest movements entail a certain danger now, I don't mean the marches to Washington. I don't mean union organizing drives. I don't mean campaigns for affordable housing in the cities. I just mean that we have to be cautious, and we have to protect our electoral flank, because our electoral flank is what will protect us.